From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO, your daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Thursday, May 16th. I'm Erin O'Toole. A ghost town sits just off Highway 34 outside of Greeley. A couple of deteriorating buildings and a sign mark the spot. But in the early 1900s, it was home to Dearfield, the thriving agricultural community founded by O.T. Jackson was Colorado's largest black homesteading site. Settlers grew corn, winter wheat, melons, and strawberries, and the community enjoyed great prosperity for many years.
I think it's very, very important to have Dearfield be an example of what black people could do and have done and the future of what black people could do.
That's George June. The University of Northern Colorado professor has studied Dearfield for decades. The National Park Service has been looking at Dearfield for potential inclusion in the park system. And this weekend, scholars will meet at UNC for a conference to discuss the history of the site. Today, let's listen back to my recent conversation with him. Professor George June, welcome to In the NOCO.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Well, you're one of the main reasons many of us even know about Dearfield. I'm wondering what sparked your interest in this unique, historically black community.
I found out about Dearfield by accident. I came from Michigan, and I had to get my car registered and everything like that. And I went to an office in Denver to do that. And the guy that was there at the desk told me about Dearfield. I'd never heard of it before. And then one time when I was driving back to Michigan, where I was getting my PhD, I saw a sign that said Dearfield and stopped there. This about 30 years ago. And I've been interested in ever since.
That's amazing. I love how just a random conversation sparked this kind of lifelong journey for you.
Yes.
Tell us about the people who settled in Dearfield. Who were they? Where did they come from?
Well, the people that settled there, because it was a homesteading site, and in fact, there's two aspects of Dearfield. One is that it's the homesteading colony, and then the second is the downtown area. And many people know about the downtown area, but don't realize that there were about 20,000 acres under cultivation. And the people that came there were from several states. There was even a family from Mexico, a black family from Mexico. And that's because Mexico was the southern end of the Underground Railroad. So we do have that. You have people who are mixtures of blacks and whites, of blacks and Indians, blacks and Latinos, and so forth, that made that colony up. And they wanted to have their own home, their own land. And fortunately, the weather out there was great. And they did not need water because the rainfall took care of everything. And unfortunately, what they didn't know at the time was that rain was in cycles. And therefore, in the 20s, the Dust Bowl comes in. And they had the best people from UNC and from CSU at that time helping them out.
But ultimately, the Dust Bowl kind of put an end to Dearfield as it was, right?
All the farming communities east of what is now Greeley, all the way into Nebraska, Kansas, and so forth. You had the Okies going from Oklahoma to California and all that. So it was a big thing. I even saw a photograph taken in the daytime at Dearfield in the Dust Bowl, and you could hardly see anything. And the people out there say if you looked at the sun on a bright day, all you saw was a blue circle in the sky. So it was horrible. Before that, they had bumper crops of everything. So that's how great Dearfield was.
And what's so interesting to me, and something that you have learned over the decades that you've spent studying Dearfield, is how absolutely vibrant the community was. We know at its peak, there were about 300 people who lived there, and a number of businesses, including a grocery store that they built, a blacksmith shop, plus a school, churches, and a dance hall. Could you talk about the role that this sense of community had in helping people thrive there?
Well, the people they had not farmed before, and there were people in the communities around that thought they would fail. And then after a couple of years, they were just amazed that these people are great. They put everything they have into running everything. And now O.T. Jackson, he was a messenger for a few governors. So he was in Denver a lot of the times, and he even wrote that the people who were responsible for the success of Dearfield mainly were the women and the children, because the men were out in Denver or other places working to get money to get the seed and the tools and everything they needed. So the day-to-day operations, at least at first, were the women and children that got it off the ground.
That sounds like a tough life. I mean, you had the men going out and working day jobs basically in Denver and then coming back and farming and homesteading in their off time.
It was a lot of hard work. But after a couple of years, though, the men did not have to leave the work because the farming was fantastic. They were able to have bumper crops of everything. And they also had the animals, the chickens, the geese, the horses, the cattle, and everything like that they had out there as well. So it was a big, successful community until the Dust Bowl came in.
Right. And again, they certainly knew how to have fun in the off time. They had music and dancing, and people even used to come from outside of Dearfield to enjoy that.
Yes, one of the founders of Dearfield, one of the first people that settled there, he played the banjo, and his brother-in-law played one of the other instruments. And so they used to have dances at Dearfield on Saturday nights. Now, the thing about that is that white people in the community would come to the dances, and they would be on the same dance floor together. Meanwhile, in Denver, you have the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. One of the largest claverns, is called, in the country was in Denver. But at Dearfield, you have black people and white people on the same dance floor dancing and also helping each other. They would loan each other equipment and so forth. One of the first wheat, the harvesters, was owned by a black farmer in Dearfield. And he would loan it not only to people at Dearfield, but to his white neighbors. I also talked to a Mexican-American guy who's dead now. He was 90s when I talked to him several years ago. Some of his family intermarried with some of the people in Dearfield and the sister community of Chapelton. So again, you have the rise and separation of the Klan in Denver, and you have people intermixing and so forth out at Dearfield. Dearfield had a softball team that played against the white softball teams in the area. So all these things are going on, and you have to take care of each other, because in a farming thing, you never want to get your neighbors mad because you never know when you're going to have to borrow something.
George, what do you think studying this community of the past can best teach us about the present?
I think it shows that in spite of some of the stereotypes that some people, not all people, but some people have about African Americans being lazy, don't want to work, we could see at that particular time how fantastically hard that they worked. And it was written up in newspapers. There's even some comments from the white farmers in the area who were just amazed at how hard that they worked. They built their own school. They had their churches. They had everything. There's even reports from the sheriff's department that said they were just really amazed that there's hardly any crime in Dearfield. And these are the kinds of things that, if given the opportunity, people will help themselves and will expand. And that's one of the main things that happened at Dearfield.
Well, Professor George June, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for asking me, and keep an eye out on Dearfield. And perhaps if you haven't gone out there, you may be able to go out there at some time when it becomes part of the National Park Service.
And if you want to learn more about Dearfield, check out our show notes or head to kunc.org. That's it for us today here on In the NOCO. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you tomorrow with more of what's happening in Northern Colorado.